Welcome to the Microservices meetup today, everybody. As is tradition, we can start going around the room and introducing ourselves. And the dean will come to you at the end so that we can also say things about LVT. So we'll start here. What's your name?
So my name is James Solomon. I recently, as of last week, started here at LVT.
Right on.
So I'm actually, my responsibility is in IT. I'm over the ERP system,
Okay.
but I'm working very closely with the gentleman on the EBS team. We're building out, event sourced microservices to integrate with the systems. So I'll be working with them to help improve that as well. So
okay.
So I was invited to this. I just came to find out what it's all about.
That makes so much more sense now. And Nadeem said the pizza's just in the kitchen and invited you to go get it by yourself. You work at LVT.
And I found out when I was getting the pizza.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Connor, I also work at LVT. I was DevOps. I'm now soft dev. So yeah.
Eric.
Okay, I'm Eric. I'm here for the pizza, but I'm also here because of the smart discussion we always have. So I like that, and I like learning about what we do. Okay.
Troy Thomas, I also work at LVT, software developer doing some event type.
I'm Ethan. I worked at LVT. Now I work at Omni and I'm presenting tonight. Let's skip to the online folks. Casey.
Yeah, my name's Casey and I like to party. I also work for Wilson Sonsini. We do some event-tied stuff and Ruby. So yeah, just excited to be here.
Awesome, thanks, Casey. Roman.
Hey, yeah, I'm a backend Go developer working for a small fintech on the East Coast. I'm here in Utah, learning a lot about LVT apparently, but excited to get to see what other people are doing with microservices and event-based messaging generally. Just sponging things up.
Awesome. Well, welcome. Glad to have you. Swapna.
I'm Swapna. I also work for LVT as a software developer.
Welcome. And then finally, Tyler.
Hi guys, Tyler Slater. I'm a co-founder CTO of a company called Parallel. I don't work at LVT, unfortunately. And I would join you in person, but I just remembered I got a notification that the event was in like 5 minutes. So I'm joining remotely for today.
Right on. Well, we're so glad to have you. Thanks for coming, everyone. And then Nadeem. We'll turn to you.
Yes, my name is Nadeem. I work in LVT. I'm a director of engineering here. Manage a couple of teams, and we love to host event-type training. Yeah, and please do welcome at our new site, new building, and happy to have Ethan run this meeting from here. Thank you, Ethan.
Thanks, Nadeem.
Yeah, one more.
Yeah, Justin just joined us. We're doing intros.
Hi, I'm Justin Janes. I work at LiveView. I'm on the EBS team.
Welcome, Justin. All right, cool. So today's topic is all about view data components, and I'll maybe join the Zoom call from the computer I'm presenting with. Can anyone hum some good hold music right now?
That's Jeopardy. I've never heard Jeopardy on hold, but that'd be interesting. It would be interesting. He's right though, the music helps. Go ahead, Dan.
Are we gonna get copyright strike when we post the video?
I think this is in Creative Commons now.
Okay, good. Because when they take all the revenue from all 20 of the views that we're gonna get on this.
Reach a threshold before they'll even consider you for monetization.
Do you have anyone in the waiting room?
I think you get so many seconds.
Jerry said he was trying to get in.
Jerry.
Before they'll get upset, yeah.
Jerry, just got you there. We barely finished intros, so if you want to introduce yourself, Jerry, go ahead. You were joining audio when I said all of that. Jerry, do you want to introduce yourself?
Okay, Jerry Briner, I work at LVT.
Welcome. All right, let me share screen here. There we go. Okay, so this is the like map of a system built with this. So for the folks who are new, it is a microservices meetup. We talk about the principles of microservices, but it's very heavily also, it heavily includes the event-tied framework, which is a Ruby-based project. The event-tied project, and you can read about it at eventtiedproject.org. It's a really great toolkit for building event-sourced autonomous microservices-based systems. And what today's focus on is in these systems, you have your user interactive components, web servers, API servers, whatever you want to call them, receiving user requests, writing things to a message store, which is different than a message broker or message transport. So something like Kafka, RabbitMQ, those would be message brokers. Message store is a database that stores events. And in an event source system, those events are the actual state of the system. There isn't a separate write to the database, then publish an event. Writing the event is publishing it, is recording the state. So like if you were modeling bank accounts, for example, you wouldn't have a column that's the balance of the account. You'd have a series of events. $5 was deposited, $3 was withdrawn, and so on and so forth. And the business of writing those events are these things over here called components. I always represent them with lightning bolts because they're the parts of the system that actually encode the business logic and do stuff. And it was a lot funnier to me 5 years ago when I started using that image to say, if you've ever been struck by lightning, you know, that's action packed. But I don't know, like that one just isn't holding up in 2023 for me anymore. These events have some really wonderful properties for building a system. One of their not good properties though is like if you had a table with a row per account with a column for a balance, it's now very easy to show a user what their balance is. You just show them what's in that row. And so what today is all about is how do we take all of these events we've been getting and then do something to them so that we can paint the user interface with data that a user would actually care about. I mean, in a bank account, you do actually want to see the individual transactions, but the individual transactions don't tell you a balance. So how do you get a balance so that you can show it? That's the example we'll use, but other results for that could be, like, I don't know, when we were doing the device video, the composite video example, maybe you want to see the actual video and not just a record that files were fetched and stuff. So over here on the right, I have these trapezoids because that is the proper shape for these pieces of the architecture. I used to call these aggregators. So folks who worked with me before, I used the term aggregator a lot. I don't use that term anymore because it is confusing. The kinds of questions I've been asked about, can an aggregator do X, says to me that it isn't clear what an aggregator does. An aggregator's job is to take events and make view data. So, and their components, they're a specialization of a component. So the proper vocabulary is view data component. This was correction I received within the event tag community. So it's a great Slack to remove your misunderstandings of things. So we're gonna say view data component. So as I say view data component, you've heard me say aggregator before. I'm talking about the same piece of the system.
Is that official name now?
I'm calling it that. Yeah, that's what that's what they would call it in the event type community. I made mine up because I thought I knew better 5 years ago. I didn't.
So view data doesn't imply that it's only data that's being used by a UI. It could be used by others. That's always confused me when you say view data. I always think of something that's going to be presented or displayed.
Fair. So view data in the sense like a database view, like a materialized view. So it could be what feeds an API response as well, or what gets rendered as a UI screen. But that's the word view is in the same sense as a database is materialized view.
Materialized view.
Exactly.
Makes sense. Okay.
Okay. So that's situates us there in the code. I can't
Do
actually
we
speak.
need to change our aggregator names to view data?
I think we should.
I will leave that as an exercise for the reader. But if I could wave my magic wand, my recommendation would be that it would reduce confusion.
I'm not gonna retroactively change it, but we might update it for other things going forward.
Nope.
IMO, you would just not have a separation between the two. Just understand what a component is.
For the longest time, I assumed an aggregator was something very different from a component, and not that it was the same structure and function, just doing something specific that the others aren't.
And that was a harm that we did when we split them to the two in the generator, just because we wanted to have the Terraform be different. That's the only thing that changes, is it creates a database.
Yeah. I'm sorry for my contribution to that.
It's okay. We forgive you.
Consider this session repentance. Grievous error.
Glad you're
Okay.
recording.
What was that?
Glad you're recording. in the
Yeah,
business
yeah,
areas.
it's public, right? We learn things and we move on. So, I'm gonna set aggregator. View data components consume events produced by other parts of the system. And in this case, we're using event tied's account component example as the source. So I have open on the screen the gem file for this account list component is what I'm calling it. So like even in the name of the repo now, there isn't a differentiation between how you would name a component and how you would name, well, I guess how you would name a component, because it is a component. It's a component that does a particular thing that we'll see when we jump into the code. So I am just pulling in the account client gem that the event tied account component has in it. I'm just doing a local path because that is not actually published to Ruby gems. So folks online, if you have any questions about Ruby or Ruby syntax, feel free to ask it. We don't expect anyone here to just know everything. And so it's very much an atmosphere of, we want to help people learn and understand, because that's what we're all here for. Okay, so that is in place. Let us start with some tests. That's how I like to start. So following the conventions that event tied has, if I have a component, it has automated tests, and some of those tests are going to handle events, but I'm handling the account events. So these aren't my own events. These are coming from the account component. So that's why this folder is named handle account events. And within there, I've only coded up handling 2 of the events, because depending on time, we could mob doing the other 2, or you could rush home and do that yourselves, because what else would you do on a Thursday night? Right? All right, here's a test for handling the opened event. I should probably say, so the events, let me open that up real quick. Let me just go here to the account component folder. And within that folder, which by the way, you could get at GitHub account component. This is the component I'm pulling this from. I can put that in the Zoom chat real quick. Welcome, Steve.
How are you, Ethan?
Doing all right.
Serves you right.
That's funny.
It's true.
Here in the account component messages, we have messages for opening or an opened, a closed, a deposited, a withdrawn. There's also a withdrawal rejected. But those are the kinds of events we would consume here. And our goal is to make a list of accounts with a balance column. So I wasn't trying to say that table doesn't exist at all in the system. I'm just saying that that table is not the authoritative state of account balances. It's very useful for rendering a screen. So here's a test. We're going to test our handler, so we need an instance of it. This line here gets us an example of an opened event from the account component. So this account client, that's that gem that I had up on the screen a moment ago. And it exposes to us what are called controls. And those are not like UI controls. That's controlled examples of data. We had that discussion once or twice in previous meetup sessions about the philosophy behind control. So unless there is strong demand, I won't revisit that right here. And we could just leave it at this line gives us an example of an opened event. That timeout tells me we'll just go with that for tonight. For the way that my solution works, we need the global position to be set on here. What's the global position? Let me go look up message DB. So the message store that we're using is called message DB. It is just a table and some stored functions and other things that are put into a Postgres server. So running message DB, if you know how to run Postgres, you know 90% of how to run message DB. So from an operational standpoint, it lets you use a new concept without having to hire someone dedicated to keeping a different thing running. So that's a nice feature. It has a single table in it called messages, and these are the columns in that. The column we're talking about right now is global position, and that refers to that message's position within the entire message store. So it starts at 1, goes up until whatever max big serial is. That's a pretty big number. You wouldn't hit it in your lifetime unless you live for a very long time.
What if you're running a large hadron collider? Like
Wrong tech if you're doing that, and you get what you deserve.
All right.
Yeah, I love MessageDB and Eventide, but it's not for that kind of scale. And I know you know that.
Sorry.
No, it's funny. I like it. Okay, so we need to have this global position set on the message. You would normally have that when you're reading it from the message store, which is what would happen as you're processing these. But because we're in test, the control doesn't return a global position. So we just set it in the test using an example of what a global position would look like. I think I might be in the wrong branch of this. Oh, no, I'm on master. Okay, always background tmux. All right, so cool. We've got an open event, has a global position. We're just gonna double check to make sure it has the 2 pieces of information that we care about, an account ID and a sequence ID. Sorry, not a sequence ID, a sequence number, which is just its global position. And then we invoke the handler, we call it. If you're new to Ruby, this dot parentheses here, really fun to try to Google if you don't know what it is, but the short version is whatever handler is, this dot parentheses is equivalent to handler.call. So it's just a shorthand for invoking the call method. I happen to like it because I have functional programming sympathies, and that makes it just look like a function call, which is also fitting because objects are just behaviors. So it works. So we invoke the handler, and what we would expect to happen after we've called the handler with an open event is whatever our code is, it should insert a row into a database with the account ID and the sequence number. Why the sequence number? We'll talk about that in just a minute, but we're just putting the account ID. We're not caring about the customer ID and all that because customers won't go into accounts that aren't theirs. People are honest.
You mean, they won't.
I don't have
Not that they
passwords.
can't.
Yeah,
They just won't.
they'll see an account and be like, oh, that's not mine, so I won't do anything with that.
I believe in the honesty.
Raised in Japan.
So this upsert account here, normally we'd be typing this all out. This is the thing that does the upserting, and we're going to ask it some questions about how it was invoked to verify that we actually called it with the correct data. So we get a reference to this thing that does the actual database query. And then we say, hey, were you called with these data values? And we hope that it says yes. That's a fire hose, especially if this is your first time here. So is it clear what the test is doing? Does anybody have any questions about the basic flow of the test and what we have set up here?
Can you show handler upsert account?
Yes. We now have to go write the code that makes this test
okay.
pass, so,
That's right.
yeah.
You haven't written it yet.
That's right. I mean, I have, but I
But
deleted
you,
it.
okay.
But does the logic of the test make sense before we do implementation?
I'm not trying to let an uncomfortable silence hold there. I'm just navigating to where I already have this written, because otherwise, in all this pressure, the heat of this meetup, I'll type things wrong. Seriously, I'm gonna cheat and look at my previously implemented notes here. And I'd say I don't feel about it, but I keep talking about it, so I must feel bad about it. Some sort of embarrassment there. All right, so within an event type component, you might wonder, why does this say -2? Don't worry about that. It means nothing. 2 comes after 1.
That's how we're gonna name our components this time.
Yeah.
Our aggregators are gonna be -2.
Because they're the second kind of component.
Exactly.
Oh, don't do that. Or at least if you do, don't claim I told you to.
And said to do it.
You don't wanna take credit.
No, I don't in this case. All right. So we have a lib folder, and then within lib, a folder whose name matches the component. These are just the conventions that you would see in event type projects. And this is a handler test, so we need to write a handler. And there are 2 main ways of doing view data generation that I've seen. One of them is, as you're consuming the events that you care about, you produce these low-level database commands to another stream, and there is another consumer of those commands that then actually performs the operations against Postgres. That has some merit and some value, but I'm less familiar with that way of doing it, so that's not what we're going to get into. If some of the event type folks were here, they could speak to that method more clearly than I could. So as always, just because you saw it here in the meetup doesn't mean it's the only way to do this, right? This is just how I did it to illustrate the concept. The other branch is, as you're consuming the events that you care about, you do stuff directly to the database, or not the database, whatever you're trying to build the view data with, because that's the thing. We're going to build view data into a Postgres table. You could make, your view data could be an Elasticsearch index. So you could consume events and put things into Elasticsearch. You could take your events and generate static HTML pages of somebody's account view, and then just show them that when they log in. Like, all of that's perfectly valid. We're going with Postgres because, again, it's familiar, but sky is the limit. Every new tech brings operational complexity. So trade-offs. All right, so that's what we're doing. So let's open our handler here. This is kind of
Oh, there's a comment.
There was a comment.
Oh,
Casey tossing in a link, it looked like.
oh yeah, the link that he just put in there, which you
So,
can't.
very ninja-like, apparently, that just threw out the link to like a library that Eventide has for doing view data with Postgres. And it's what I believe is what Ethan was referring to, where you like put out like a command into a stream and that gets slurped up and then executed, but I'm still not 100% familiar with it.
Everything Casey said is correct. So this library, if you wanted to peruse the code, you could see how it works in practice. I don't think it speaks to the why you would choose this form over the other. So maybe that could be another session at some point. Anyway, here's our handler code. So countless component handlers. We throw in this module account here because this handler is handling events from the account component. It's not our own. If this were our own events, we would just have handlers events there. Include messaging handle. That's what makes a class a handler class in Eventide. Configure, we'll fill that out in just a moment. But if we want to make a handler, what would I type here? Exactly, which is a method that comes from messaging handle. Now, the type of event that we want to handle in this case, normally we could do this. We could say include account client. Oh my goodness, Can't type when people are looking. Messages, events. And so within the account components gem with its client gem, it exposes its message definitions. By including them, those now just become available on our class here. So we could just do an opened like so. Whoops, that's not proper syntax. That is though. I'm not going to do it that way though, in large part because the repo that I'm cribbing from, it's my own repo, doesn't do it that way. So I'm going to just write out the full namespace there and close that. It's a shame because now we can't see the full line. Okay, so basically when you define a handler, you say, I'm going to handle, and then a reference to the class of message that you're handling, and you pass it a block that receives the instance of the message that you're handling, and then you do stuff with it. So neat, we now have a handler that's being called, and let's run our test to see that it still fails. Handle account event opened, gonna run it in the lower left here. What did we get wrong? Cannot load upsert account, right? Because I deleted that file. So here's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna check it out because that one's kind of gnarly and I don't want to retype it in front of me. But yes, that would have created the file. Account list component, and that would be in queries and upsert account.rb. Nice. What happens? Oh, right, I'm referencing another file that doesn't exist. Everybody look over there. Okay, here we go. So undefined method upsert account. So we're trying to reference something on the handler that doesn't exist yet. We expected that. Let me close the Zoom chat here. So up here in the handler, if you look through the account example and any handler example you're seeing, handlers tend to have dependencies, things they work on. And so there is a dependency method that Eventide exposes to us that we get through the chain of, I think this makes it available to us, like it requires the thing that gives this to us. So we're saying, hey, I've got some stateful dependency that I depend on. I want you to call it upsert account, because that's what we're doing. And it should conform to the following interface. And so now, Justin, I think you asked the question about this line. Now that line should stop failing. And our assertion fails because
You didn't call it.
exactly, right. So what is that word? That. Saying it is its own reward and is such an important characteristic of writing a proper handler. It must be idempotent. Yeah. That's so wonderful to hear that because you're relatively new to this stuff and that message is so important. And the way we've done that in things like the account component is we project the account in question and then we say, hey, have you already handled this message through some means? That's not the method we're going to do it with first here. Our handler is still going to be idempotent, but in the account component and all the other components you've seen, we get the stimulus message and we end up writing a new message, right? It's not what a view data component does, or at least the way that we're generating the view data. We're going to get that stimulus message and our job is to update a table somewhere. So there's no additional message required. And what we'll see is that Postgres gives us the means we need to make our handler idempotent. Fair enough. So what we can do is just imagine if we had this upsert account thing in here, we could just call it and we could pass it the account ID, right? And then also the global position. That's going to factor into the idempotent stuff. And so if we had this class called upsert account that had a call method that would just execute an insert query into a database that was idempotent, would that be enough for our handler? Yes. And we can even indent it the proper amount. 4, 2, find. 3, not find. I had 3 spaces in front of that line. I mean, a lot more than 3, but that's just odd. 3.
I get it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you, Steve.
With all those qualifications, that's all you need.
Yeah. So what would that actually look like? This one is pre-filled out because it would have been a whole lot of typing. But let's have a look at it. And okay, so it's within our account list component. I put it in this module queries because it's a query and we'll have more than one. It has a dependency on a session. This is a Postgres session, which sits here in the project. How did I get that? I just copied it straight out of Eventtide's gems. So there you go. That's how we got our session. I duplicated it though because it's not talking to message DB. And so I just wanted it local there. Anyway, this is some stuff. If you watch our session on the doctrine of useful objects, these are some methods that build as a constructor. It's a convenience method for getting a fully operational upsert account instance. So the details of that, if there are questions, we can go over them, but I'll just gloss over it because it's not a big deal for today. Configure is also related to that. That one we'll talk in a little bit of detail later. But here is the actual call method. We're going to skip it real quick and come down to the substitute that's in here. This is, how to explain this part without going too deep into the weeds. So if you are writing a test that calls something that, say, does some IO procedure, right? You don't really want to do that IO procedure in your automated test. You just want to make sure that the thing you're actually testing interacts with it correctly. Eventtide's way of doing that involves that dependency macro that we saw earlier. It's really slick the way that it works, but one of the things that gives you is if on your class, remember down here in our handler, we said dependency upsert account, and by the way, it follows this interface. If this has a module substitute on it with a build method, Eventtide will use whatever you return from that as that dependency in test. By default, yeah. So I wrote one here and it returns this class, which when you call it, instead of writing to a database, just shoves the parameters you passed it into an array.
That's interesting. So Eventtide does that under the covers for us. So we've been, in our test, we've been actually instantiating the substitute and setting it up in the test, but that's really
Oh, yeah. If you've got the module substitute on your class there, it will find it via reflection and just be like, oh, I'll use this instead.
very cool. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty slick. And so this class is whatever you want it to be. I mean, ideally, it would be something that would actually serve your purpose, but you could write it to not do that. Anyway, so we stash all the calls we get with the parameters into an array, and then we have a called method on there, which if you remember from the test, that's what we called right here. We'll check to see if it has been invoked with those parameters. We don't check to make sure it was only invoked one time, none of that stuff, because this doesn't do it, and it probably ought to, but you know, time is finite. And yeah. Last time we talked about telemetry and how to do that in a cool way. So that is intentionally left as an exercise for the reader. We'll go with that story.
There was another.
Oh, another question.
You just said
Saying goodbye.
you say-
Oh,
didn't
It's
say
gone
it.
already. Bye, Roman.
see you, Roman.
I caught it late. I just saw that there was some.
Okay. Okay, so that's the substitute. And it's this class that's actually getting called, not our operational one. Makes sense to substitute, familiar-ish to some. If you have any questions, please do ask. Okay, so now let's look at the actual one, which we will put into action. So here's, put some logger things in there. It receives its 2 arguments, the account ID and the sequence. That's all we care about for upserting the account. And then within the class, we have the actual SQL statement. We put the params into an array and pass that array. That's how the PG driver gives us SQL injection protection. So here's the actual query. Insert into table named account. these parameters, account ID and sequence, values, placeholders, we give those placeholders a type. And then it will substitute in the things from the params array in a SQL injection safe manner. On conflict, because here's the thing, here's where the idempotence comes from. There is a primary key on this table. Oh, we should look at that. How do we get the table in place? We'll do that next. Should have done it first, but we're already in the middle of this. The account ID column on this table is the primary key of it. And of course, when you try to insert a duplicate value into the primary key, you would crash. That's one of the whole purposes of such a column. So if we get a conflict on the account ID, I don't know why we're setting this here. That's silly. We should do nothing in that case. How did I do it over here? Oh, hold that thought, everyone. Queries. Yeah, that's silly, but I don't want to change the code because it works. I think that's YOLO.
I think if you find already that account ID, we are just updating without inserting a new one. That's right, Ethan.
Yeah, it'll work properly. But the update is unnecessary. And that's defending my sensibilities right now. So I think it's just do nothing. Because if you get a conflict, this row already exists. Ignore it. We don't want to do anything with it.
But if you had more columns that you did want updated,
Yes.
then you could use this structure.
And we
I'm sorry,
will.
but you're
We
not.
will when we go to update the balance on the deposited event. Casey.
Well, I was just, why is the update unnecessary? Is it only ever going to run an insert, like the upsert account once ever?
With as far as we got in this method in the code, yes.
What I mean is that like it's only ever intended to run it once, like as far as obviously replaying messages and stuff, but you're only ever intended to do it once. There's no updating that's necessary.
That's right. We're
You
actually
can open an account once.
exactly. You only open it once, and we didn't code the closed event. So
Gotcha. Okay.
yeah. We're actually going to look at two different ways of doing this tonight. So there's like the major divide, the command streams versus direct to the database. Within the direct to the database, there's another branch there. One is just take each event and apply it as you get it. And the other is get an event, project the entity, and then write the projected entity to the view data location. We'll look at that method second. And that one, this upsert event does have the update, set these fields, et cetera, et cetera. But yes, so provided do nothing is the Postgres syntax for it. This is how we get the idempotent. So even when we recycle this message, because that's what happens, you recycle the messages, you see them again, you're only ever going to insert that once because we deliberately, because first of all, you get an error, but we put that on there that if there's a conflict, cool, let's move along. So is there another chat or is this just this computer saying haven't seen it? It's that, okay, all right. So within here, there is some code that will actually put an event in here. This create account interactive test. So I'm gonna come down here, run Ruby test interactive, create account, and let's start with the fresh databases. This folder has a Docker Compose file in it that will run an instance of Postgres for the view data and an instance for MessageDB. So hopefully it's easy to get started. I would recommend running Postgres and Docker in production, but no one's suggesting we do that either. It's just a thing to make development easier. So run that script. Here's this handy message saying you wrote a type opened to this stream name. We can convince ourselves that actually happened by going to our Postgres database. This is a tool called Table Plus, which I love, except for the fact you cannot make the font size bigger. So my apologies to everyone. It is so unfortunate. But again, MessageDB is just Postgres. So how do I connect to it? Well, how do you connect to a Postgres server? If you like dbeaver, use that. If you like the command line, use that. It's just Postgres. I'm using this because One day I Googled and found it, and now it's stuck. So here we are. Here's our message. Global position 1. It's the first message in this message store. Da-da-da. It's there. It's an opened event. You might be thinking that's weird. There's no open command to precede it. That's right, because this isn't an actual operational message store. It'd be really weird to get this set up without seeing the command, but whatever. I digress. All right. So now we can start the component, and hopefully I didn't delete too many things here. I'm so happy about that. That's just the typical output you would see when you start a component. Now then, remember when we would do this with all the components we wrote? We'd come back here, we'd reload the message store, and we'd see new messages. Do we expect to see that this time? We don't, because it's view data, not additional messages. So I'm going to tab to the other window that I have here, which is where my view data database is. And, oh,
You don't have a table yet.
don't have a table yet. We were supposed to come back to that, weren't we? I'm surprised it didn't give an error. Oh no, there's 2 reasons why this didn't work. Let's look at the schema first. How do we get that in place? All right, so there's so many things here. I really wish I had slides. I guess I have one slide. Little nuance here. I really want to stand up and point to things, but it wouldn't make a difference for the folks that are online. So this view data here is written to by the view data component, or the view data is written by the view data component. However, your API servers, your web servers, whatever, needs the view data as well, right? So yes, those two things are coupled together via the view data. Now, when you're developing this thing over here, it would probably be really handy to have that actual schema so that you can make sure, oh, I'm reading things correctly from the database when I go to show them. So
Now, I
hey,
don't
we're back.
I don't want to create a tangent,
Yeah.
but suppose you're not using Ruby in your web environment, then you can't use the gem.
That's true. Yeah, so you
Any
might
ideas?
look at a different way of doing it. I have ideas, but they're kind of, let's say, at the experimental phase.
Okay.
You just need a SQL file to get shared. So you could have a repository that had schema in it that had like a gem spec in it and a package.json. So from that common thing with the SQL files, you could package it to multiple languages. If
Like when you build your gem, you could have it actually also create a JSON file that tells the SQL structure.
kind of, I'm talking like a yet another repository that would just bundle the schema files themselves, the SQL that would generate it, that your view data component could then pull in.
Oh.
That's an idea. I've never done it. I've yet to, in an operational scenario, deploy different languages at the same time. I've done these with Node, I've done these with Ruby, but I've never like deployed the mixed environment. So I've never actually had to solve this problem. So it's idle speculation at this point.
Okay. When you say you've done them with Node, talking about Node for your web backend, right?
No, Node components.
Oh, components written in Node.
Yeah. Yeah, not with Gearshaft, which is a Node.js. At 2 full-time jobs ago, I was approached and said, hey, you've got a day and a half to get stuff running. It's like, okay, I'll just crib my book code. So we took the library I wrote for practical microservices and put it into production.
Why do you have like printed on your forehead, ask me to do impossible things? And because
this is
people ask
awesome.
you impossible things all the time. No, I didn't mean his
Yeah.
hat, his actual forehead. So you have components written in Node, and therefore you have a Node library. Is that
For
what
Katie
component-
was using,
For Cadia, yeah. It was,
Oh,
we took we made
I
a
thought
few.
it was strictly a JavaScript library, but I guess that's what a node server runs is JavaScript. Okay.
Yeah.
Then Gearshaft took your book and turned it into an actual thing.
No, Mario who did it, he just somehow found out about Eventide and like the pattern. So he took the Ruby project and read through it and did a quick port. He would say, because he has said, it's not feature complete. It works for his purposes. He's running it in production and it's working just fine, but like the documentation isn't fleshed out. The documentation is you go read the Ruby documentation for Eventide. And so for the most part, it follows it, but JavaScript isn't Ruby. So there's a few differences here and there. It doesn't have the, like the attributes type checking that Eventide has.
Right.
It doesn't have that. There's a comment in the code. It's like, oh, maybe we could do it with this in the future. So yeah, Gearshaft is cool. It didn't exist when I was at Berkadia. If it had, we might have used it because Node was a hard, we have to use it.
And is it inappropriate for me to ask what you're using in Omni right now?
We are using Eventide proper.
Okay.
Yeah. As we are already a Ruby shop.
Yeah.
And so it didn't make sense to also switch languages when we already had the flagship implementation, if you will.
I think you've told me that before and I forgot.
That's fine. You don't work there. I don't expect you to just remember all those details. Okay. Right. Who owns the schema? That's where we got to. So the way that I did that was there's the schema folder here. And I deleted the stuff from it. Let me just restore that real quick. Lib, account list, component, schema. I don't remember the name of the file, but will that work? Oh, the folder works. Okay, so I have two files here. The schema folder holds SQL files. And I was ambitious enough to think that we would need 3 digits in front of them to order them. I can't speak for all projects for all time, but with how granular we can get with view data components, if you ever needed, that would be 1,000 different versions of your schema, I would suggest maybe there is a flaw in your development process.
You worked for Canvas at a time. You remember their migrations. Those things are very intense.
They are, but it's a big monolithic project.
Yeah.
These are very laser focused. So with that kind of focus, they wouldn't have as many reasons to change. So it's just a SQL file, right? And even the creation of it is idempotent because it's create table if not exists. So you can run that as many times as you want. You won't get a crash. Just SQL, not particularly interesting. So I'm going to gloss over it and come to this schema class here, which has.
Oh, 1 second. I want to see the last column, sequence. Okay.
Yeah.
Count ID, balance, and sequence.
That's right. We will need sequence for idempotence later, but for open, if the row exists, it's open. If it doesn't exist, it hasn't been opened. So the schema one here, all it's called does is it reads that directory, the schema directory, picks the files in order, reads their contents, and then executes it against the server. So not very interesting.
It works.
Works, yeah. Okay, so what do we do with it? Well, we have a couple of options. Could put it in start. So let me go back to schema real quick. So notice self.call, so schema dot parentheses would invoke this method. We could put it in start and do right before we start the consumers, we could just say link. And now, do you want to see something exciting? Maybe you won't think it's exciting, but I think it's exciting. It's actually script start. All right, so let's go back to our thingy here and reload. Hey, now we have an account table. Woohoo, progress. There's nothing in it. And that is because we're still using the substitute. In the handler, here's our configure method, right? We would need to actually configure upstart account. So this is doctrine of useful object stuff from a previous meetup, but our dependency here by default will use that substitute that we provided. Now we want to say though, actually do your thing. So the way we do it is we say, hey, class that has the functionality that we want, configure yourself and place yourself on me. Because it knows how to configure itself. It would be weird for it to expect us to know how it configures itself because it's the class, right? And classes encapsulate things. So with that in place, the framework, Eventide will call this configure method on our handler instance. It won't over here though, because notice we're just instantiating it. We're not actually calling handler.configure. But the framework will actually build an instance and configure it. So now when we restart, provided we don't crash, oh, now when we come and reload, look at that. There's our account list. With its
$0.
$0, because it's just been opened.
But all these banks, they offer me $170 if I open an account.
That's after 3 months.
I'm
Having the
just-
minimum balance.
And that would be a separate transaction.
That's a deposit.
Yes, exactly.
After 3 months, as you pointed out.
months.
And if you stay for less than a year, you have to pay it back
Oh, I hate that clause.
with interest.
Probably.
Anyway, okay, so do we follow the flow of what happened? We wrote a message to the message store. We turned on a consumer backed by a handler that gets the message and then calls a thing that executes a query against a Postgres database. So it's a component in that it has all the machinery for, I hook up to this category of streams. I handle the messages. Here's my handler for it. But this code is very different than what we've seen in other component handlers because they've always been like, do the idempotence check, do the actual work, write an event or a command, case depending. But in this case, to handle the event just means to run a query on that table.
On our team, we're integrating with third-party software that we've taken off the shelf. So that's very much like what ours do.
Because you would wrap that interaction in a
Yeah.
call like that as well. Yeah,
So this is a very familiar pattern.
okay.
Yeah.
So that's all it is. That's view data. We can take it further though. Of course we will. No one has to stay if you're not finding it interesting, but let's take it further because we can also look at a deposit event, let's say.
So real quick,
Yeah.
before we leave the instantiation of the database, when you said we could put it in the start file, are there other places that you
Yeah.
considered putting it?
There are, and the reason I was considering them was because I originally had an interactive test that invoked the query class. And so the interactive test needed to have the schema in place as well. And so I moved it into the test init file in that case. No, I put it, that wouldn't have worked either because it also needs to work when you start it. I put it in some common ancestor on the whole
The
requirement.
start makes sense.
Mhm. I then changed the interactive test to write the message that we want to handle, and then we just start the component and then it handles it.
Thank you.
Thank you for following up on that. I don't like leaving threads dangling there. All right, so account component has more than just the open the event. It also has a deposit. So do I have that test here? I do. So test, automated, handle account events, deposited. This test looks a lot the same. What's the difference? Oh, it just uses a different event here. So we instantiate the handler, we get an example of the deposited event. We are now making sure that the deposited event has an amount, remember, because deposits need an amount. And then we invoke the handler. Now, instead of upsert account, we have an update balance query file. So let me just restore that one real quick. So that would be lib account list component queries. Why did that update 2 files? Don't know. But I'm sure it works. And then let's remove the comment there so it gets pulled in. So we want to write another handler. Well, we would just, again, say the type of message that we want to handle and give it a name. Convention for folks new to Eventide, the class is in Pascal case, and then the variable name is the snake case version of that. You could call it Bob if you wanted to, but or event. Yes, mechanically it'll work. That's all.
I would like to hear that unzip
Oh,
afterwards. We can do it now. It's a sidetrack.
Let's
Let's
do
talk about it
message
later.
sometimes, because that's what they have it in the docs. They just call it a message. Because that's what it is. It's the message data.
yeah, they have super generic names for things in the documents, like something happened and whatnot. I prefer to give it a specific name because, so I used to do the generic name so that I could copy paste things a lot easier.
It reads better if you do it like it's like deposited at time, like.
Exactly, yeah. So like typing is rarely my bottleneck for shipping code. And
Yeah.
so the understanding when I'm within the function is more than the actual.
You know what, I have found actually that it's easier for me to read through handlers, the generic name, because the handler, you look at its title and you can see what it's handling. And then as you're reading it, your eye just grabs onto event.
I just think because it also affects how you name your attributes, because then it becomes kind of just plain English when you're reading it. You know, if you have it as deposited and then you have calls on it that are like deposited amount, yeah, like that, then you're reading, you know, call write deposited amount. And that sounds like something you might say. So instead of when you say call event.amount, where it's like, now I have to go and think back, it's a deposited event. So it's a deposited amount, it's deposited amount.
So similarly, tomorrow, go rename all of your.
New ideas.
Yeah, we've tried both ways.
We
I
have.
like this way better.
I would
It's better
say
for our team.
socializing it within the team and everyone following the same norm.
It's more important than.
Yeah, it matters.
Or I'll create a sonar cube lint that'll.
We'll disable it.
All right, so this time we have a different query file called update balance. It is the same pattern, it's just different SQL, different. Did you hear that great English right there?
You talk English.
Queries, there we go. Updated 0 paths.
You already did the checkout.
I would have expected it to, oh, there, okay, I guess it's there. Fine. I'll take it. Update balance. I'm using very technical language here as opposed to domain language because we're literally doing a database operation. So I'm not going to try to just find a synonym for update that means update, but right? Because
You're actually.
this isn't a business domain operation. This is a mechanical. I am updating a row in a database.
Whenever someone's like add, and I'm like, why don't you just say insert? Because that's what you're doing.
We probably want the amount from the deposit and deposited. And we again want its metadata or the global position, and here's why. So that looks correct to me. Let's just real quick make sure that we're totally breaking the TDD flow here as well. I apologize. If you want to see more of the TDD flow, just catch me on Twitch. Because I stick to it there. Undefined right, because we didn't.
Dependent.
Was that what you were saying, Swapna?
We missed dependency. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. Good catch. Update balance and
See that?
now.
Just one update, Ron.
Oh. If I had $1. There we go. Okay, so the automated test works. Great. Let's actually look at that file because here's where some more idempotent cool stuff happens. I'm going to just replace that one. So same basic shape, our call now takes the amount as well as the account ID and the sequence. But now here is our SQL statement. We want to update the account, setting the balance equal to what it was before, plus the amount that we're passing in, and set the sequence where the account ID matches our ID and the sequence in the row is strictly less than the sequence that we passed in. So if I replay a message, what's my sequence in the row going to be compared to the one that I'm passing in?
Will be greater. The one in the row will be greater than the one you're passing in if you're. Oh, okay.
If I replay the same message, if there are additional, yeah. So in our interactive test, we'll write one deposited event, and then we'll process it, and the sequence on the resulting row will be 2, which will also be the global position of the deposited event, because we'll do it open and then a deposited. When we then restart it and it sees that deposited event again, it's going to do update account, set balance, whatever it is, sequence equal, set sequence equal to 2, where account ID, blah, 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 and sequence is less than 2, but sequence will equal 2, which is not less than, so it will not do the upsert, so we won't get extra deposits. Exactly. Yeah. So that's where the idempotent comes from. Yeah.
So account will possibly have a lot of different things on it, like balance, it might have the name and stuff like that. Each one of those also has an associated sequence number often. Do you typically like to just prefix it with what it is? Like, would you have balance underscore sequence, and is that how you would typically?
You'd only need one for the whole table, I think, wouldn't you?
Per stream that you're consuming from.
Yeah, like if you had the customer name component, which is how you updated that, but then the balance component, each one has its own sequence number that you use. So is that an indication that maybe you need to have different tables for that kind of stuff?
That's how in my book, I would aggregate, I would generate view data to a table, and the source of that data came from 3 different categories at one point. I put sequence columns in for each. I didn't call them sequence. It was like last whatever global position. And I had 3 separate columns for that. In later talks with the folks in the event type community, they would say, don't directly generate view data from 3 separate things. Have a thing that consumes the 3 separate things and then puts them into a single stream. And then you consume that stream and write to the database. This is not the same as the command streams we were talking about earlier. You're just basically taking the events,
Copy your events
copying
to a
them to a
single
single stream. Now your view data generation is consuming that single stream. In the command stream example, you would then take that stream to make the commands that you would do, or you take our approach and just write it directly to the database.
Interesting, okay.
But yes, your instinct is correct. If my messages that could change this are coming from different categories and I have these independent consumers on them, then absolutely, yes.
But that's a less desirable design, you're saying. It's workable, but there's drawbacks that we're not discussing right now.
Yeah.
Okay, so the right way is to combine all your other streams by copying messages into a single stream. It's going to produce a single table
That's
entity.
right.
That doesn't necessarily preserve order, though.
That's true. But the only order we care about is within a stream and categories.
But if we have an opened, and then we have a deposit and a withdrawal, and the withdrawal comes first, we're gonna be overdrawn.
That would be a big problem. Those events would all be coming from the same source, and we wouldn't be able to preserve their order relative to each other. Where we aren't able to guarantee the order is if we're consuming from 3 separate categories, like all of these will go in the same order relative to each other, but these might be mixed up in between them. And if we ever found ourselves in a case where we had to preserve an order between categories, that would indicate a flaw in the design because those should have been exact. Yep. Yeah. Okay. So that's where we get our idempotents from.
Hang on. Let's talk about that for a second.
Okay.
We want to maintain my address in a separate component, right? There's a component that processes the updating of my address. So I make a deposit and then I want a withdraw printed as a check and sent to my home, and I update my address immediately before sending, but it doesn't come through in order, and then the check is printed with the wrong address. How?
I wouldn't call that view data generation. So whatever is sending the command to a component to make the check, it could potentially have your address and send it as part of the command.
Oh, in other words, copy those into the stream.
Could we, for tonight's purposes, just say what you describe as not view data generation?
Okay. You wouldn't take that operation off of view data because it's critical that you get it right. Okay.
Yes, oh, okay, yeah, big underlying assumption, your system doesn't use view data to make decisions about things.
I was just about to ask, I was like, it's, they use it to view, but if you're making, you know, a logical operation based off of that, then you kind of script your ordering anyway.
That's right, yeah, exactly. It's eventually consistent. What if the view data component isn't running?
Yeah.
And you're like, oh, yeah, cool, you've got $1,000 in your account, run it.
So if I'm a user and I take these actions to change my address and so on, and then make my withdrawal, the components are going to process these events for me and take the critical actions. But the view data might be out of date and it might show me that my address hasn't updated yet. But in reality, it's going to ship to the correct
Yeah,
address.
and you see this in systems all the time, because thanks, or like when you unsubscribe from an email list, it'll take 10 days to process. It's like, do you print it, tape it to an alpaca and send it on its way to get to the data center?
Okay.
We're covering ourselves legally.
Yeah. Like that's eventual consistency. All right, so I have a fresh message store here, no messages in it. And so we can run Ruby test interactive. I don't remember what it's called. It's called update balance. We can look at that. It basically replicates what the create account one did, but then also adds in a deposited event afterwards. So we need an opened account to do the deposit. So we put it in there. So we can run that. You can see it has 2 lines of this output. So if we come back to the message store, there's our opened, there's our deposit, or for folks who don't like the font size, there's some squiggles up on the screen. That's what they're saying. So in this case, I don't like the size when I look up on the screen. That's why I look here. So we can go ahead and start our component. And now when we come back, oh, same problem.
Yeah, you didn't configure the update balance.
Indeed, yes. So that was just to see if you guys had caught that. So
Still spelled like that wrong.
yeah.
Which you consistent.
$2. I'd be up to $2 already tonight. So we can go ahead and run that. See, the balance is updated and now we're at sequence 2. Let us shut the component down and restart it. We will replay those messages, but because our handler is idempotent, correct balance.
Still there.
And because, I mean, if you've worked with me, you know, we're gonna come here and we're just gonna get rid of that condition real quick. And we're gonna rerun it. So what we'd expect the balance now to be twice what it was before, because we just removed what makes it idempotent. And there you go. So we can convince ourselves that that line was doing something. Okay, that's that way of doing it. We've been going for about an hour. I'll do the fast version. We don't need to type through the other way of doing it. Yeah.
I have one thing really quick.
Yeah.
You should change your here doc to use a squiggly instead of a hyphen.
Because it does something with white space, right?
Yeah, because you're creating a prepared statement with a lot of white space.
Yeah, and that's very wasteful. And this doesn't at all change it for my human readability. Thank you. Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh, you're good. Good to meet you. All right, so any final questions about all that before? The code is up. I put it in the Zoom chat if you wanted to. I'll put it in the meetup link if you want to peruse it some more. I realized I asked for questions and then I started checking it out without pausing for an answer. I'm out. Okay. So let's check all that out. And then I have one more branch here. Project and apply. So the difference in strategy here is instead of taking the event and applying it and taking the event and applying it, we're going to get an event, project the stream, giving us the current state of the account, and then use the properties of the projected account to update something in the database. Does that nuance make sense? So instead of event apply, event project, write the projected stuff.
So are you saying in the scenario you just built, for example, Postgres is doing the math, adding balance, but here you'd use a projection to figure out your own balance.
That's right.
And then you'd send over the state
That's right.
directly to overwrite what's in Postgres.
Which means if you turn this on and 100 events have queued up, you will get the first one, project all 100, write the result with the sequence of that last one that you
Which is
got.
nicer to your database.
Then you'll get the second one and you'll project and do the same thing. Now the idempotent check is going to catch it.
So it doesn't affect the database.
Yeah.
Eating the database.
It's, you could view it as wasted processing, but you won't flash on your way to get there. You'll just, we know the current state. We have 100 events. Why would we ever show the user an intermediate state when we already know what the end result is how you could look at it. So I'm gonna gloss over a lot of details to keep this fresh. First of all, we don't need the update balance anymore. All we have is the upsert account. And we've just changed it to insert into account with starting values. But if there's a conflict, now update it. Set, why are we setting the account? I don't know. That one doesn't need to be there, but whatever, it's there. I'm just gonna leave it because it works, but you wouldn't need to reset the account ID. That'd be silly. Set the balance to the now current value. Set the sequence to the current sequence, but only do it where account.sequence is less than the sequence we pass in. Also, hold
Account
cow.
ID.
You want to tilde it for the white space again?
Oh my dear goodness, yes, both of those. This one, if you happened to look out in the parking lot prior to this, you would have seen me furiously typing away on this. So.
We're in the parking lot. We have a nice office with air conditioning.
To maintain the appearance that I walked in.
Yes.
Mostly was, that one wasn't. Okay, I mean, I just wanted to see if we would catch that during the. So we have to bring in some other things to make this work. Like we need a projection. So I just copied this out of the account component. So I didn't take like the account gem. There's the client account gem. The full component is also bundled as a gem. There's a gem spec for it. You could take that, pull it into the view data component and get direct access to the projection, to the entity store and all of that. That is risky because now you're coupling to private details of another component. Your account entity and my account entity, though they have the same name and use the same source data, they are not the same thing. Because mine is my view of it, yours is your view of it. It just so happens that copying the code over directly and using it is exactly what we wanted, but that's not guaranteed to be the case. And by copying it over rather than referencing it as the gem, that can now change while mine remains the same because this is the view that I need of it. So we have a store this time, we have the projection, we have the entity. And so if we go to the handler, all the changes is which account am I dealing with? Project the entity. Projection and view data generation are very conceptually similar to one another in that take events, roll them up into some sort of a current state. Projections do that on the fly and are the current state of the thing. View data is eventually consistent. Yada, yada, yada.
State machines.
Yeah. So all we do here is which one, fetch it. Now that we've got the thing, just call upsert with the projected data. So it's really not.
So it does make the database call every time, but it doesn't
Yes.
change
That's right.
because of the idempotence. It doesn't change repeatedly the value.
That's right. And a normal practice, you probably wouldn't be starting with a gazillion backlog events, but maybe you would. Maybe you're doing a new view of data that has been around for quite some time. Because that's one of the things, like that's one of the claims I made in the description is like, this is where these architectures start getting really cool. Because you can have this stream of source data and you're like, you know what would be a good view of that? Oh, too bad we were only storing the current state of it. I guess we can start having this view of it going forward. Well, no, because we have the source data from the beginning of time. We can do new and interesting views of it.
That's how we're doing multi-region, you know, as we look at going to like Azure or going into East regions, we just have our view databases and spin up the view component. That's going to be hard to get used to. And then just have it blitz through it and recreate them. And then we don't have to create a snapshot. They just have done it.
Yeah.
It's like just a thing that they do.
Did we get another chat message? Sorry, I'm not, oh, gotta head out. See you, Tyler.
Where'd you go?
You're already gone. But if you watch the recording to see if we said goodbye to you, we said goodbye. Yes, that's the kind of meetup we are. Cool. And that's all I got. Do you have any questions or comments? Casey, Casey is not in a position to be as free with details as the rest of us are. But can you say anything like, in general, does it look familiar?
Does it look familiar to what we use at Wilson?
Yeah, conceptually, do you look at this and be like, oh, you did that?
Sorry, I got a crying, somewhat crying kid with me.
That was his response to your query.
That was pretty funny.
What did you say?
Oh, just like in general contours, do the concepts we talked about tonight seem familiar?
Yeah. I mean, at like a high level concept, yeah. You like you have a component that's projecting the stream, and then writing that data in aggregate into a database table somewhere, right? That's we actually use active record and some other stuff in what we do, but yeah, very, very similar.
So active record is the this provides, and it's a separate gem. And so you could use that to interact with the database too. So you're not writing raw SQL files, if that makes sense. Like in general,
You can swap anything out for the actual view.
yeah.
Like you could use a text file or a
Yeah.
JSON string or whatever crazy thing you want to come up with.
The ORM just gives you a nicer way to write a query. Nicer.
It's nice until it's not.
That's
Yeah.
debatable.
You can horribly misuse ORMs. Like
You
really
can
bad.
horribly misuse SQL too, so.
You can. You can misuse everything.
So can you briefly describe the other major branch? These are two branches of
Yeah.
in the same vein,
Mhm.
which is basically direct to SQL.
That's right.
What is the other?
I have no visuals.
Can you
So,
describe it?
Let me take you on a trip where we use our imaginations to
You do have
picture
this, I know you
boxes
know.
on a chart.
Swap their lab question.
Oh, Swapna, you have a question.
I see the name of the project seems like a account list component, but for the view data components, is there any standard or is there any convention that we should follow to name the projects?
I haven't seen, so if you were to talk to Scott Billware and Nathan Ladd, they would say that a hole that they perceive in the community education is that there isn't yet an exemplar view data component that would answer this question. So there may be within projects that I'm not a part of, but I don't know what it is. So I just went with the count list component because it's a component that deals with account lists. But I can definitely see that would require understanding that this is a view data component, something I might solve with the README, which I do in this one. But I would say that each organization will need to figure out its way to communicate.
But they're gonna be all in our in our repo in the same namespace. Each repo is sitting side by side with the others, so they'll need a distinctly different name. You know, like
We
Yeah, like that.
I mean, there's nothing wrong with having, you know, X view data component, just you know, hypothetically.
you know what I mean? Like we've already used some keywords to name our
Yeah.
components that are doing the things. And we would want to name it somewhat similarly.
So like if you had a video component, you might have a video view data component, maybe. I don't know, maybe.
At that point, if it's serving the same functional purpose as aggregator, but it's just now 3 words instead of 1, what advantage does that offer? Other than maybe you just need to train, because then it's a developer problem. Then developers don't understand that aggregator and view data components are different. And so all you're doing is solving that. Now they know it's view data, when in reality they just didn't know that aggregator means view data.
They'd have an easier time of it if some tool hadn't come along and told you all the wrong things.
Oh, please.
But it's been nice for us because again, having that one word for the tooling side of it, we have keying like for all of our automation
Yeah.
that picks up on that and then make sure that they follow a certain rule.
What really sparked me to want to call it something different was I would get questions like, we want to migrate data from this place to that place. Is that something that an aggregator would do? And it's like, no, because aggregators, I didn't say this, aggregators don't change state. If you want to get pedantic, and you all know I do, technically, yes, they do change like the state of the database itself, but an aggregator would never change the state of your domain. So like
Posting commands back.
yes, generate your view data from accounts all day long. That does not change the balance of an account. It doesn't open them. It's not the fact that we put it into that table that means the account is open. It was the opened event that means that it's open. And so by naming it an aggregator, I think it led people to believe you should use one of them to do things that aren't appropriate, that aren't view data.
I just see it as it's a component that listens that does not speak. You know, it's just kind of got a hand tied behind its back, but it's not at all like dramatically different.
Yeah. So that's why I do the name change. And I would recommend it just to drive home the point that they are components, but a specialized component. And also aggregator sounds too close to aggregate, which gets into domain-driven design, which don't want to send that message either.
Well, I'm not in the realm to make that choice anymore, so I'll let someone else fight that battle.
Okay.
We have a guild. We can decide as a group. Remember the guild. You can come and argue your case.
I'll send you a plush doll of me with a judgmental look if you choose to keep saying aggregator.
Okay, we collect those.
Love it.
Doll will join the guild.
So there isn't a new component type that is an aggregator. We're just, all you're suggesting is the thing we used to call aggregators should now be called data. Is ambiguous.
Yes, because that's what they always were called. I invented the new name with aggregator that was less useful than what they were originally called.
When you use the generator, you might want to specify that you're looking for a view data component so that it leaves out certain pieces that you wouldn't need.
For the record, this code, I started with the stock event type component generator and just tweaked some things.
Our generator does a few additional things at this point.
But the aggregator path is broken.
Yeah,
I tried it the other day. So it doesn't.
I've never tried it. Because on our team, like I pointed out, we are pushing view data into third-party softwares. And so we're doing this pattern already using the standard component generation.
For the 20 views that will happen for this video over time as it's put on YouTube, if you hear that tool come along comment, I'm referring to myself, future people watching this video. So
We knew.
you
But
know,
they don't.
They don't. Yes.
But let me then set the record straight.
I thought you were talking
Ethan
about
is
pieces of
not
software.
a tool.
I appreciate that, Justin.
It was like, 9 out of 10 things that worked really well. So no, I'll take those odds.
Appreciate that. Cool. Any other questions? Folks online?
I have a completely unrelated question.
Well,
It shows my ignorance. Sure, or we can do it afterwards offline.
as we prefer.
I don't care.
I don't care either, but if it's useful
He's going out to the
information.
world.
So,
Yeah.
We can stop the recording if you want.
I don't care about that either. Projections.
Yeah.
I need to understand the nuts and bolts. So is the event type processor querying all of the events in the string, pulling all of those in and to do the projection before it then calls? Because for some reason, I had this mental picture in my head that the projection for the opened event would get called when I get an opened event. So we would process that and then off we'd go, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't work with the sequencing, and I get
Right.
that. So under the covers, event type is saying, I need everything in this stream and I'm gonna project all of them, and then I'm gonna pass you the opened, and then later I'm gonna pass you the deposited, and then I'm gonna pass you.
Effectively, yes. My node library, literally, yes. Eventide pages through it. So if you have,
Sure.
it grabs them all, but if you say had 10,000 events, it'll grab them in pages, call your projection for each one in the first page, move on to the next one and so forth. So you don't have to like.
But it doesn't actually call your handler until it's walked through every one of the events and projected them all.
That's what I was going to say. Are you talking about a handler, or are you talking about the projection where it's applying messages to the entity? Because those are two different spots of the code that behave differently.
There's store and cache for entities that both do things with projection data.
So in my handler, one of the first things we do is a store.fetch.
Yeah. So the sequence would be your consumer is hooked up to some category and it starts pulling for batches of messages to process. So take account component, it's looking in the account command category, finds a message, it immediately dispatches that to your handler.
Okay.
Now your handler code goes, okay, which account is it? Let me fetch the entity. When you call that fetch, you've previously configured the store with the category it's looking in, and you are now passing it the ID. It will construct the streaming where those events live, and then
query
grab
those.
them, start paging through them, calling your projection so that it can apply it to the entity. And when it returns, it has the now projected one that the rest of your handler then.
And you
That
can
makes sense.
shortcut this by turning on snapshotting.
Sure.
And
Well,
then
snapshotting is, sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead, Justin.
that was my full comment, basically.
Oh, sorry. I was gonna say snapshotting is mostly for when the component first starts up to kind of short, or like when it first fetches the entity to not have to fetch a whole bind. Yeah, I know, sad.
You have a faulty entity cache and you don't have like a good persistent disk set up.
What I was gonna say is that like
Doesn't have to
The-
start from the beginning. You
when
know
you
where a good state was.
when you do a store.fetch, it will keep that entity in memory and it'll remember how far it got into the stream. And then the next time you say store.fetch, it will say, are there any more messages for me to project off of? And it'll apply them to the entity, store it, repeat. So it's not like when you get an open, maybe it does the full stream, but then you get the next event, it doesn't refetch open. It will only fetch the next event. So it kind of incrementally builds on it. It's kind of optimized in that sense.
Hang on,
It is just an optimization though. In theory, it could fetch the whole stream every time.
Doesn't it also, I thought it also wrote a snapshot position stream in the database.
Only if you enable.
That's if you enabled snapshotting, and that's periodically, like every
That was
100
my
messages
comment.
or whatever.
You enable snapshotting.